C'est qui? Qui? C'est Kikina Studio.
Hello and welcome to this new episode of JINS. I have always wondered why I didn't hear much about queer people in the Middle East and North Africa while I was a young boy in Morocco. There was actually no such thing as queer people, unless we would talk about those strange, deranged people who would be so psychologically disturbed that they would have feelings or some kind of physical attraction towards the same sex. Trans was not even a word that existed. Queer art was just portrayed as art. The media portrayed queer people as devilish people, and queer people had to flee the country. Words in Arabic didn't even exist till a few years ago. You'd only hear about insults like shaz in Jordan, or zamel in Morocco, or louti, linking homosexuality to bodies who are penetrated, passive, as the people of Loth in the Biblical and Quranic passages say. Words mean something. Sometimes they mean the word to someone. Sometimes they can crush someone. Meanwhile, you would hear people being incarcerated in Morocco under Article 488 of the Penal Code because they were caught kissing in public or crossdressing or just suspected of being too effeminate. You would hear news about people being hanged publicly in Iran, catfished and then arrested in Egypt, kidnapped in Syria, shot dead in the streets in Iraq, and imprisoned in Saudi Arabia. Queer people were never shown as heroes nor as champions. Yet, the whole world knows that the art world is full of queer people. The world itself is full of queer people. About 10%, some studies say. Wherever you go. So why is it so important to hide them, their creativity and their beauty, when they also have so much to show to the rest of the world? Why is it so urgent to give them a platform of self-expression in this part of the world? Why is it so allegedly dangerous for the status quo to show more emerging talents on international stages or magazines who break all the rules and let their identities shine? To discuss all of this, I'm very happy to welcome Khalid ABDEL-HADI. Khalid was born and raised in Amman, Jordan, and has family with Palestinian and Kurdish Turkish Bedouin roots. He graduated from Petra University in Amman in 2014 with a degree in graphic design and visual arts. Khalid ABDEL-HADI founded Mykali magazine when he was in his teens with the aim of providing LGBT-related content. Established in 2007 by a group of passionate students with various interests, from arts and design to politics and activism, Mykali is the first LGBTQIA inclusive conceptual webzine in Jordan and one of the most consistent in the region. Mykali strives to address social problems, homophobia or transphobia, to document the stories of the community and to empower the youth to defy mainstream gender binaries and heteronormativity in the Arab world. Khalid is the editor-in-chief and the creative director of Mykali. He's an activist and a curator, so basically he's the best person to answer my questions. My dear Khalid, shukran for accepting my invitation on JINS.
Thank you so much for having me and for inviting me to be part of JINS. I'm extremely excited to be here and to have a really nice conversation.
So first and foremost, I'm interested in knowing more about your own journey, okay? So to give our listeners a little bit more of a context, because Mykali comes from a very personal place. It's even named after you. I really want to unpack this courage of yours to achieve a project like this. I think for everyone who's listening, more or less concerned with feminist and queer issues in the Arab and or Muslim context, it would be amazing to know more about how to spark the fire inside you, how to trigger one's own bravery. See what I mean? So where does this courage come from?
So Mykali as a publication, it's basically an online digital space in a form of a publication. It's a queer feminist intersectional publication. And basically the aim of this publication is to document the voices and the stories of people from the region and the diaspora. and to make sure that we are preserving these stories and these experiences. We make sure that the content that we are working on is coming from a very authentic place, from a need. And that's basically what the publication is all about. The topics that the publication gets into are very part of the identity towards this publication. It works on raising awareness and documenting voices of the community. It creates a sense of community, and because these are the gaps that we are trying to bridge and to make sure that we are part of this type of engagement. My sense of creating this space or this publication came from my personal need or for reaching this type of content, for feeling alone in this struggle. I could not find any type of content that I can relate to. Personally, I was born and raised in Jordan, in Amman, Jordan, and these references or sources or content or even conversations were it was not really circulated or even produced in any type of way. So I felt it was built out of a need rather than a want. And I feel like when the publication started, it lacked structure, it lacked aim, it had a purpose, but it didn't really have a structure. It wasn't studied properly. I was very young. I was still in high school when I started this publication. And I feel a lot of the courage comes from being, you associate youth with rebel usually, and I think that's what it came from. I wasn't really thinking of the consequences. I was really thinking of the moment, what I really wanted now, what the community wanted, and I really, as an individual, I did not know how to engage within a collective or community, and I felt existing online and creating this digital identity and digital space and being a digital persona myself, I felt that's my way of communication and engagement. Part of my journey specifically towards when I was part of this publication is that it becomes part of your identity. When you're that young and you start something and it becomes this, let's say a big space, for instance, it became part of my identity. It became part of my existence. And it sort of shaped a facade at the time that I was trying to deconstruct all the time, because you're not one thing, you're several things.
Yeah.
But to me, and for such a long time, I was only, that person of Mykali magazine. I was nothing else.
I'm also intrigued by Mykali as it is a very alternative form of activism, right? Because activism is not just defined as demonstrating and walking down the streets to claim your rights or being involved in NGOs, which is also very important, of course. But there's also beauty and power in what we call artivism. There's also huge power in the media because the messages can be conveyed to massive crowds, social and real, with words, both written and told, working on webzines or podcasts, so like Mykali or JINS. So how are these new forms of media offer a stage for the new voices for social justice in oppressive societies?
Absolutely. Within Mykali specifically, we definitely we rely a lot on social media. So we do we have a hub, which is a website where we do publish and reflect the works through this website, and then we definitely channel them on our various social media, whether Twitter or Instagram or Facebook or SoundCloud or YouTube, and each has different mediums and different type of audiences that you want to engage with. I can tell you about two encounters that we faced that actually does get into your like it answers your question. In 2014, there was this Jordanian YouTube channel called Kharabish. It's very known for publishing videos related to comedy and social commentary, whatever you want to call it. And in 2014, they published this video. I do not really recall the name of it, but it was by this emerging comedian, and they joked about homosexuality, and he referenced that the Holocaust was not finalized, it wasn't finished. They didn't kill all the LGBT people, basically. The disease still spread, that he was joking about it, that he was like calling for the Holocaust to open again. What we did at the time after that as a reaction, the way we reacted was we published like a statement calling out the YouTube channel. We demanded for the video to be removed, and they need to issue an apology. Why the video was dangerous, and it was inciting violence, inciting so many type of harmful type of content that people were subjected to. Like, they have millions of followers. I wouldn't say viral, but it had a lot of engagement from different members of their community, whether regional or local, in Jordan, because the YouTube channel is originally from Jordan. And because of this type of engagement and calling out and this public demonstration, virtual demonstration, I'll call them, the video was retracted and they issued a vague apology. They didn't really address the issue, but they really said something about like, yeah, we don't want to incite violence. We don't want to be part of this type of conversation. So they did remove the video. And I feel like because of this new wave of interaction and how to call things out, that was like one of the perfect examples that we go, like how social media did its job at the time. One of the recent ones was a couple of years ago, 2018, where we did a social experiment, a video social experiment with members of like female students. And the video was the journalist went downtown to a conservative area, specifically in downtown Amman, asking men if they allow their female parts, members of their family, to work. Of course, it raised a lot of conversations and controversy in Jordan because, well, of course, we do have women who work. Like it's a very apparent thing. It's not something that, but I think the way they associated it was with honor. That was the question. So what we did, the social experiment, we worked with female students on reversing the scenario where we wrote the exact same scenario, gave it to women, went to exact same locations where they did the interviews, and we just did exactly the same interviews, but with women answering what the men answered, but said by women. It went viral. Women were tagging male members of their family. They were like joking about members of their family. There was this whole bubble, and we loved how women were standing up for it and how they were claiming that space, and it created a conversation.
In the international media, the general aspect about Mykali is that it's an LGBT plus magazine from Jordan. And the regional sensationalist media, Mykali, is perceived as a perverted publication. Why is that? How is it portrayed? Where does Mykali fit within the online media spectrum?
For years, the publication was associated with sensationalism because at the time, the power was not really within our hands, right? We were an emerging publication. We did not really have a lot of engagement. It was very under the low key. It was very community-based. It was not really made for society at large, or it wasn't the reference that it is now. And at some point, I feel like there was an abuse of journalism toward their spaces and how they interacted with the queer or the LGBT community, whether in Jordan or the region, because there is a lack of power, like a huge gap in this power dynamic. They do control the content. I don't think it's ethical the way they do. Why the journalists are compromising the safety and the health and the well-being of one of their citizens, one of the members of their countries. Like I'm part of my society. Why would someone compromise my health or safety or someone else's? And I feel like these type of content, does not harm certain people who are from the queer community, but they harm people at the street who could be visible in their identity or maybe not non-binary. They could be very attacked. These things tend to have a domino effect in that sense, where people can be abused, harmed, questioned. The purpose of this publication is definitely to counteract all of that stigma, all of these toxic encounters that we are having, and definitely calling out journalists on abusing their journalism and their ethics and how they don't really navigate it in a very purposeful way. And I feel like that's definitely part of our value.
And so I'm sure that there are so many hardships to avoid censorship, aren't there?
We are definitely censored in several countries. Qatar is one of them. Jordan is another. The Strip of Gaza is another. At the end of the day, we choose to go against this censorship and to publish anyways. Our goal is definitely to make sure that we are moving forward and not facing these obstacles with a pause. I feel like the internet has so many creative ways in distributing your content. I don't think challenging governmental decisions that can take a lot of your energy and put into that combating these censorships, that I feel like, as an editor, I prefer to put my energy elsewhere into this type of work. One of the advices that I can go through like reflecting on it, counteracting these type of censorship is definitely reaching out to digital rights organizations that can help and lead legally and technically, to understand, because like in our case, it was a collaboration between the Media Commission of Jordan and one of the telecom or several of the telecom companies in Jordan. And same goes to Gaza and Qatar, where the government have to work with the telecom companies to be able to block your DNS and etc. These are very technical terms and technical ways to understand how censorship works. I believe like this is the way to understand it.
The reconstruction of Mykali within the past 12 years is huge. The magazine went from a regional LGBT plus magazine to a magazine that does not identify as LGBT plus, but rather queer and feminist, to prevent anyone from winnowing down to a specific representation of the Arab LGBT plus, right? So getting to explore Mykali on a deeper level makes it obvious that there was a will to reconstruct and unlabel or even decolonize the content written on the platform, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think like 4 of the pathways towards the evolution of Mykali as a publication were 4. One of them is definitely outsourcing our content, which is something that I can get into. Another is like shifting to bilingual, or like our shift to including more than one language, English and Arabic, and ethics and values. And at the same time, making sure that our content is becoming not only queer and feminist, but also intersectional in that sense. And the last one is to opening up our geography, basically, because the publication was very localized. It was very centralized around Jordan and specific place in Jordan, maybe the capital. And then there's also decentralizing that and moving forward beyond borders, where it became regional. It stopped becoming Jordanian. And I think many of the mistakes that I see now online, that people refer to it as a Jordanian publication, but it's not really. It's not fair for the people who work in it and for the people who are contributing to it. So removing these borders, interacting with different countries and different contexts, because you also have to deal with the diaspora in that context, because that also shifts that conversation on being queer or feminist or intersectional. It does shift from one country to another, and the context does not stay the same within the same country. Second is outsourcing. Our content is not controlled by a core team, and it's not controlled by a list of writers that we only work with. We outsource. That means that we publish a certain structure for a theme that we would like to work on, and then we send that structure to the public, to our followers or people who like to engage on certain sections of the website, where they can see what are we working on next, and then they can submit their proposals, their writings, their work, their art, photography, etc. And then this way you generate new blood into the publication all year long, and you engage with different type of artists and writers and creatives all the time. The publication moved from looking at labels within a certain perspective to becoming more intersectional in its approach, the way it looks at its issues. It's not far removed from society and the current conversations that are happening now. And the last thing is to make sure that the publication moves from only focusing on one language to focusing on Arabic as the main language of the publication. It moves from English to having bilingual, to focusing on Arabic mostly, because, let's face it, there's a lack of resources, references, and conversations and engagement towards Arabic content when it comes to feminist, queer, and intersectional content. Mm-hmm. So we need to make sure that these resources are more reachable and very preserved, and at the same time generating these resources and content within that specific language.
Yeah, but then how does it participate in the conversation on rebuilding the representation of queer people?
For me as an individual, it's a little bit toxic, because that means that these are the only people who are qualified to represent something that we're not elected for. In any case, the way we work on is it refers back to the answer of the previous question, where we do engage a lot with the community into creating and generating these conversations and content.
So actually, it's very healthy. You're not saying this should be the perfect ideal representation of queer feminist people, but rather you can be who you are. You are your own representation.
Absolutely.
So the LGBTQIA+ community in the Arab world has become much more vocal about its need to be acknowledged. Several publications were started in the years between 2012 and 2015. Mawalih in Syria, Ehna in Egypt, Gay Day in Tunisia, Aswat in Morocco, and Barra in Lebanon. Each one has been shut down because of political unrest, death threats, or governments blocking their sites and social media pages. We need to also pay tribute to all the content shared by activist organizations like Atiyaf Collective and Nasawiyat in Morocco, Helem in Lebanon, etc., etc. So how do you think activists, artists, and journalists should work together to invent a better future for queer people in the MENA region?
The publication already embeds this type of structure. We definitely have a collaborative nature. It takes two to tango, right? So we do have that collaborative nature that we, as a community, we need to act as a collective in many ways. You cannot work on your own. In this struggle, it has to be in a collective manner. That's my personal vision, and that's how Mykali works as well. Second is that we don't take this cause as a competition. We don't look at it from like, oh, let's be the first to post this. We don't look at it as a scoop. For us, it's very important that people don't look at Mykali as a news channel or a channel that reports on certain things that are very related to current event, or we're doing it for validation. I mean, we definitely live in an age where we need to raise each other up and come together and rise to the occasion collectively, basically. Again, we run in a team by the community and for the community. So definitely we go back to the idea of outsource and mixing between public and private to create this content all together with the community.
Yeah, because sometimes, not all journalists, but some might make you say things for the buzz, for the scoop, as you said. And this is what should actually be perceived as more perverted.
Yeah, I mean, well put.
And what about Arab queer people in Europe, facing both racism and white-splaining from Westerners? Or even the queer Europeans who feel so bad for Arab queer folks and fantasize how horrible life must be as a queer Arab. When you read Edouard Said and Joseph Massad, you also acknowledge that there is a neo-colonial perspective on queer Arabs. Aren't there stories about queer Arabs who are happy, who are successful, who are not rejected by their families, or are they all miserable?
When I often get interviewed by white or Western, let's say the word Western media or international media, they often search for the trauma. They often search for the negative, the struggle. And I always have a problem with that because it relies on context, right? Like it depends where you're saying it and how and where and who is reading this. I felt that we are more than our traumas. We're not specifically identified through our traumas and struggles, even though that is very verified and it's very valid to our own experiences and our own community. I think the best way to put it is that the way to negate it is having a conversation all the time and to raise awareness about these specific issues, that we are more than our negative story. My friend Amir Ashur, who is like an Iraqi activist, once said they want our stories to be sexy in their media. Like there's this quote that I read in this book that I'm reading called Bad Girls of the Arab World, edited by Nadia Yaqub and Jul Qawas. And it's within a chapter by this academic writer called Ziya Abdul. And she narrated perfectly, where she really talks about the experiences of her struggle between her nationalism and feminism. She says, I felt that in every turn, I was betraying some aspect of my identity. If I privileged my feminist concerns, I was a national traitor. And if I privileged my post-colonial identity as an Arab Muslim, I am being an apologist. And I felt this way, our context and our stories are being used into media that are already primed against our own countries and societies. And I feel like if I'm going to be part of this conversation, I want us as a community, as me as an individual, to hold my own country accountable. I want to take matters into my own hand, and I would like to change the discourse and the conversation into it. I'm not going to go twisting my government's hand in some kind of international event or whatever. I feel like these things, my personal experience and path and the way I work does not align with this type of movement per se specifically. The magazine has its own success not only on traumas, because one of the things that the publication really works on is to actually highlight the success and the struggles, of course, of our queer community or the LGBT community, whether in the region or abroad. And it really does counteract these negative engagement constantly by the international media towards our own community.
Yeah, but even the way, I mean, it's a completely different topic and it's a bit of a digression, but Even the way Western journalists are addressing the World Cup in Qatar and the issues around rainbow flags and homosexuality in those very violent Arab countries, they always have this point of view on how horrible the countries in the MENA region are horrific towards queer people, as if it were a safe haven for queer people in Europe.
But you can also see the propaganda, right? How the international media is really trying to attack Qatar from all angles towards specifically the LGBT issue. I'm not saying the government of Qatar is like very angelic towards the LGBT community, but with the recent story of this doctor who came out saying, and how he doesn't feel safe in his own country and how he feels safe with his partner in San Francisco, etc. And, showing you the contrast between living there and living here. If you come here, it's heaven. If you live there, you're in hell. So these types of the conversations that we're trying to negate all the time, we live in our own countries. We can definitely hold our countries accountable from within our own society and country in our own way, and not specifically on some international TV elsewhere.
My last question would be this one. What can we do as citizens of the Middle East or North Africa who come across Mykali's interviews and become aware of feminist and queer issues in the region? Should we go out on the streets and reclaim the power of the people? Should we live happily as long as we live hidden from authorities? What can we do as allies? What would be your advice?
I mean, that really depends on the person reading or listening to this, because you can definitely be a person who's like marching down, or you can be someone who is doing this type of demonstration. In my sense, the way I took it was being part of this publication and raising awareness and counteracting all the negative things that we are faced constantly by this world towards our community. So definitely, this is the path I took, which was media, journalism, and art. And you can definitely find your own way and your own path, and you can create your own path. I think one of it is like listening and reflecting on one's life. There's this quote that I really, really love by Munat Tahawi. It encapsulates this question in a way. She says, as a feminist revolution targets patriarchy in the state, streets, and the home, because it recognizes that there is no liberation without sexual liberation, without gender liberation, without queer liberation. It states as a revolutionary statement, I own my body, not the state, not the street, not the home, I do. So I feel it definitely channels back to the person to take matters into your own hands and how you would like to take this movement forward. Would you want to use arts and journalism and documentation as a way to do it, or do you want to do it by within a physical manner and marching and doing that?
We will soon wrap this up, but first, you know this. In each episode of JINS, we debunk a myth together that I have been told or that I have often heard of. So the other day I was discussing with a producer, a cis heterosexual white man, who told me I have absolutely no problem with feminism nor LGBT rights. But no one's going to read an article or listen to a podcast about feminists and queer people when you're not a feminist or a queer person. What would you have answered if you were me?
I mean, بالعربي we say زي النعامة اللي حاطة راسها بالأرض. It's exactly like the ostrich that hides herself in the ground, pretending that nothing is wrong around her. But I think as members of our own society and community, we need to educate ourselves more. You cannot really distance yourself from other issues that your own country is facing. People in France did not really care about many people of the LGBT community until the marriage thing happened, and then you saw all the homophobes in the street because it was crossing the boundary. And then that's when they started to take action, even though they're not really they did not care all of these years, or maybe it was really this type of cancer was really not really effective until like you pushed it that way. But it wasn't that visible until you agitated in a different way. And I feel you owe it to yourself to understand. You cannot really say I don't know or I don't understand, or really no one is going to read this type of information. This way you really sound as an ignorant person who really doesn't want to understand his society better, and different type of citizens and members of your own society who lives in it and face all sorts of struggles. And I do believe that this is where intersectionality comes, is that you cannot fight for your own rights without fighting for the rights of everybody in your own society. You need to not see yourself as an individual, but also part of a collective that is different, and it has all different types of struggles and if you want to have that type of responsibility to your own community, you need to look at it from that perspective. Take the story of Sarah Higazi, for instance, which we're recording on the day of her memorial anniversary, second year. Sarah Higazi is a queer Egyptian feminist who attended a concert in Egypt and raised the rainbow flag in it. And because of the sensationalist media in Egypt and the regional media, she was arrested by the government, tortured in prison, and she was pushed into exile to leave to Canada, where she was not allowed back. And her own mom died, and she couldn't go back to mourn her own mom. And I feel it was amplified because of the COVID and the being quarantined and feeling alone in the struggle, and all the traumas that you're faced from the things that what she faced, specifically since we talk about Sarah. She ended her life on the 13th of June 2020. And her story really spoke to many members of the community of the queer and the LGBT and the feminist community. It was one of the most relatable stories. And I feel by fighting for Sarah, we were fighting for ourselves. And we felt like we didn't want her death to go in vain. And I felt that was a unanimous feeling to so many people within the community. And this is what I'm trying to say, is that many people who are not from the community, feminists and the queer community, sympathize with her story, felt with her story. Her words and her struggle really touched them in a way where they felt like they can relate to her story, even though they're not queer or woman or Egyptian. I think you need to look at things from an inclusive perspective and not look at it from a selfish perspective. Me, myself, and my box, and my room, and my friends, and my only life, and this is the pathway and the narrow way that I'm looking at life, and no one else is involved in it, is not a way to live life and not to move forward. You're not really making you're not moving forward with your society. You're really taking it back.
Wow, that was like a president's speech.
I felt goosebumps.
You should run for office.
No thanks. I'm really good where I am.
Thank you so much, Khalid. It was very, very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Very briefly, a few things to remember. 1. Arabs in the region don't need a westernization nor white saviors to rethink their identity. 2. Queer and intersectional feminism in the MENA region does exist and is growing in influence thanks to the wonderful activists, artists, and sometimes journalists who do so much for human rights. 3. Don't hesitate to go check www.mykalimag.com for amazing articles, even one of mine. My dear listeners, thank you very much. Remember, you'll find all the aforesaid references in the description below, as I did every single time during season 1. For the most curious minds among you, I'll put a few book and film recommendations linked to today's topic, be it on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Google Podcasts, Deezer, or else. Don't forget to subscribe to JINS Podcast account and to leave your questions and comments. Go subscribe to JINS Podcast on Instagram at JINS_podcast. Don't hesitate to share around every time you listen to an episode, because you should always remember that someone, somewhere, somewhat needs a new light shed on Islam, gender identity, sexualities, Arab origins, or anything that can be prone to oppression. So please do your part and pass the word around. See you next week.